Are we on? Well, what we want to teach on today is give a testimony of Dr. Kenneth E. Hagin, who is now in heaven, but give a testimony about when he was a young man and how he had died and actually went to heaven. He went on to tell us, he said, I was born and raised Southern Baptist as a boy, and he said, I thought that the Lord Jesus Christ and all of his disciples were Southern Baptists, and then he said it came as a real shock to me when I found out that they weren't. He said, I got to reading my Bible one day and decided that Paul the Apostle couldn't have been a Baptist because he said, I thank my God I speak with tongues. And he says, I've never heard a Baptist say any of that before. So being born and raised Southern Baptist, he said, I felt sorry for everybody who wasn't a Baptist, but you know, friends, you can be a church member and not be a Christian. He said, even though I'm a member of a church and believe in going to church, just going to church won't save you or make you a Christian any more than going to the barn will make you a cow. Being a member of a church, he says, won't make you a Christian any more than being a member of a country club will make you a Christian. He says, you have to be born again. And he went on to say, he says, we've got too many people who think they're a Christian just because they're a member of the church. And that's something for us to think about. He said, I joined the church when I was 9 years old, and the reason that I joined was because my Sunday school teacher said to all of us boys one Sunday morning, how many of you want to go to heaven? Well, he said, every one of us want to go to heaven. So the Sunday school teacher said, well, when the pastor gives the invitation this morning, you just go on down to the front there. And so Brother Hagin said, since they all wanted to go to heaven, when the invitation was given, he said several of us just walked right down to the front, shook hands with the preacher. We all joined the church. We were baptized in water. And he said, really, actually, I thought that I was a Christian. And he said later, when I got into an evangelistic type of service, even one sponsored by our own church, and the Spirit of God began to deal with me about being saved, I said to myself, well, I'm already saved. He said, I belong to a church, I've been baptized in the water. He said, I'm already a Christian. But as a baby, he went on to say, he said, I was born prematurely with a deformed heart. And he said, I weighed less than 2 pounds at birth. And he said back in those days, they didn't have incubators to put babies, premature babies in, so the possibility of my living was practically none. Nevertheless, he said, I did survive, but I never ran and played like other children. I never had a normal childhood. And when I was 15 years old, I became totally bedfast. He said 5 doctors said that I had to die, that I could not live. But it was there on the bed of sickness that I was born again. He said my mother, grandmother, and youngest brother Pat were sitting there in the room with me because I had taken a turn for the worse. The doctor had been called, but just as Grandpa's clock struck 7:30, he said my heart stopped beating. And I could feel, faster than you can snap your fingers, the blood ceased to circulate way down at the end of my toes. He said my toes seemed to grow numb. And he said this numbness spread up to my feet. To my ankles, to my knees, my hips, my stomach, my heart. And he said, I leaked out of my body. He said, I didn't lose consciousness. He said, I leaked out of my body like a diver would leap off of a diving board into a swimming pool. I knew I was outside of my body. He said, I could see my family in the room, but I couldn't contact them. I had it in mind to say goodbye to Mom and Granny and my little brother, but I leaped out of my body before I could get the words out fully. And he said, I began to descend down into a pit, like you're going down into a well or a cave. He said, I didn't know that my physical voice picked that up. And as I was trying to say goodbye, I knew I was going down into that place. And he said, all 3 of my family members were present, and they testified later. They said, when you said goodbye, your voice sounded like you were way down in a cave or a cavern. And I continued to descend. I went down feet first. Down, 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 he said. I could look up and see the lights of the earth, and they finally faded away. He said darkness encompassed me round about. Darkness that is blacker than any night that man has ever seen. It seemed that if you had a knife, you could cut a chunk out of it. You couldn't see your hand if it was 1 inch in front of your nose. And he said the further down I went, the darker it became and the hotter it became, until finally Way down beneath me, I could see fingers of light playing on the wall of darkness, and I came to the bottom of the pit. This happened to me many years ago, and yet it's just as real as if it had happened the week before last. Spiritual things, he says, never grow old. When I came to the bottom of the pit, I saw what caused the fingers of light to play on the wall of darkness. Out in front of me, beyond the gates of the entrance into hell, I saw giant orange flames with a white crest. I was pulled down toward hell just like a magnet pulls metal. I knew that once I entered into those gates, I couldn't come back. I was conscious of the fact that some kind of a creature met me at the bottom of that pit. I didn't look at it. My gaze was riveted on the gates, and yet I knew that a creature was there by my right side. I didn't know until a good many years later when I discovered in the book of Isaiah that the Bible actually says, hell from beneath is moved for you to meet you at your coming. It stirs up the dead for you. Think about that, folks. When the devils know that there is a man or a woman who is not a Christian, is dying, it stirs up hell. They get prepared for his coming. He said, that creature took me by the arm to escort me in, and when he did, high above the blackness and the darkness, a voice spoke. It sounded like a male voice, but I didn't know what he said. I didn't know whether it was God, Jesus, an angel, or who. He didn't speak in the English language. He said it was in a foreign language. That place just shook at the very words that he spoke. And the creature took his hand off of my arm. There was a power, like a suction to my back, that pulled me back. I floated away from the entrance to hell until I stood in the shadows. And then, like a giant suction from above, I floated up head first through the darkness. And he said, before I got to the top, I could see the light. It was like you were way down in a well and you could see the light up above. He said, I came up on the porch of my grandfather's house. And then I went right through the wall, not through the door, not through the window, but through the wall. And seemed to just leap inside of my body like a man would slip his foot into his boot. Before I leaped inside of my body, I could see my grandmother sitting there on the edge of the bed, holding me in her arms. When I got inside of my body, I could communicate with her. I said to her, and I don't know how I knew it, Granny, he says, I'm going again and I won't be back. I said, Granny, where's Mama? I want to tell her goodbye. She said, son, I told your mother that you were gone, and she rushed out on the front porch praying. And then I heard her. She was on the porch praying at the top of her voice. When I said, I want to tell Mama goodbye, my grandmother called her, but she couldn't hear because Mama was praying so loud. If you're not ready to go, you want somebody to be with you at a time like that, you're afraid. And so he said, Granny, don't leave me. Don't leave me. I'm afraid. I'm afraid I'll go while you're gone. And I want somebody to be with me. Don't leave me, Granny. And so she gathered me up in her arms again. And I said, tell Mama I said goodbye. Tell Mama I love her. And then I felt myself slipping. And I said, Granny, I'm going again. And my heart stopped for the second time. It's almost as real to me today, over a half a century later, as it was that day. I could feel the blood cease to circulate. The tips of my toes went numb. And then my feet, my ankles, my knees, my hips, my stomach, my heart. He said, once again, I leaped out of my body and began to descend down, 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 down until the darkness encompassed me round about. The lights above faded away. And the further down I went, the hotter and the darker it became until I came again to the bottom of the pit and saw the entrance to hell. I was conscious that that creature met me. I endeavored to slow down my descent, and yet it seemed like there was a pull that pulled me downward. And that creature took me by the arm. And when he did, that voice spoke again, a man's voice.